Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you can take your seats, feel free to continue enjoying breakfast while we get the program going. And thank you all for coming today through the rain and braving the 32nd, 34th day of the government shutdown. I don't know, I've lost track of count now. Anyway, good morning. My name is Glenn Spencer. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Employment Policy Division here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And again, I want to welcome you to today's event on best practices to combat human trafficking. As we all know, human trafficking is a global problem. It affects millions of people each year. The Department of Homeland Security estimates that human trafficking is second only to drug trafficking as the most profitable form of transnational crime, and it generates billions of dollars of illicit profit each and every year. But it's more, frankly, than just dollars. Trafficking is modern-day slavery, and its victims share the tragic experience of the loss of their freedom. Now, today's event is happening during National Slavery and Human Trafficking Month, or Prevention Month. During this month, we're working with leaders in the private and public sectors to raise awareness on combating this scourge of modern-day slavery. All of us have a responsibility to help stop human trafficking. And it's important to understand and recognize the signs of trafficking and to understand where and when it might occur. First, we need to understand that traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to lure their victims and exploit them in commercial, sexual situations or in labor situations. They look for those who are susceptible, including those who are psychologically or emotionally vulnerable, who are experiencing economic hardship, who lack a social safety net, or who are victims of natural disasters or political instability. Second, the trauma caused by trafficking can be so great that many people may not identify themselves as a victim or even ask for help, even in highly public settings. Third, trafficking exists in many different surroundings. And many of us may have encountered a trafficking victim and not even realized it. Because so many are vulnerable to trafficking, victims can be encountered just about anywhere, in residential neighborhoods, airports, bus stations, hotels, even in your place of work. Trafficking occurs throughout the world, both here and abroad. Now, today's event, you'll hear from a broad array of stakeholders on the efforts that they are undertaking to stop human trafficking. So we're fortunate to hear from representatives of the business community and folks, including folks from companies like UPS, Delta Airlines, Deloitte, Walmart, and they all know that the business community brings a unique perspective, voice, and unique resources to combating trafficking. We're fortunate to have some folks here from the Department of Labor to give the view on what the federal government is undertaking in this space, and we're extremely fortunate to be able to hear the powerful story of Jolene Hollis, who will share her personal experience as a trafficking survivor and her insights into how we can all stop this horrible crime. These are all important experiences, perspectives, and stories, and I'm thankful for all the participation of our guests, so to all of them, thank you very much for coming today. And I think what you'll hear from all of them is an important theme that runs through their stories, and that is the need for partnerships. We're all stronger when we work together in this space and in raising our efforts to combat and become aware of human trafficking, to prevent it from occurring, and to help the victims of this crime to recover in everything from personal healing to recovering from the trauma of trafficking, to re-entering society, and to reclaiming their lives. So before we formally begin, I want to extend a couple of other thanks. I want to thank A21 for working with us to develop the guidance document that you've all got on your table. Which is about leading best practices in combating human trafficking in the business supply chain. There's also a one-pager on your table which narrates the results of a recent red team exercise that the Chamber did on trafficking, so I'd encourage you to look at that as well. And then I want to thank all the companies who are here in this room, and thank you for all the efforts that you are undertaking to stop human trafficking. Today we're relaunching, if you will, our Human Trafficking Task Force under the leadership of Stefan Markulowicz, who I'll bring up here in just a moment. The task force consists of member companies across a wide range of different businesses and industries. Anyone who is here that is not involved with that task force, please let us know. We'd be happy to have your involvement and your engagement. We're looking at undertaking a number of initiatives this year, things like new partnerships, finding ways to better communicate important information between the government, the private sector, and other stakeholders. So there's a lot of things we'll be doing this year. I also want to take a moment to thank the Chamber staff that's helped put this event together, Michael Billett in the back, John Drake, other folks who have worked on this. Thank you for all of your efforts here. So now I'm going to call up to the stage Stefan Markulowicz, who's the head of our task force, who is a shareholder at Littler Mendelson, and Nicole Clifton with UPS. So thanks to both of you for being here today, and the stage is yours.
I think I'm mic'd up. Am I mic'd up? Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. I want to thank everybody for coming in on this rainy Thursday morning. It's really exciting to see this group here and as many people as we have on this program. We started this task force a number of years ago with the hope of trying to share different ideas and to demonstrate to the policymakers and others that business is doing a tremendous amount of work in this area to deal with the scourge of human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking in a supply chain or sex trafficking in the out in the general community. And we have, I think, worked very hard to convey our message to policymakers and other partners that this is an important thing, and there's a lot of really good work being done. Because there tends to be a desire to regulate in this space among policymakers, because I think we all can align around the fact that it's a real problem, and obviously laws and regulations are one way to resolve a problem. But I also think that there's an awful lot of innovation and creativity that is being used and deployed by companies in partnership with non-governmental organizations and business federations that are dealing with the problems in ways that, frankly, no regulation or singular regulation could resolve. And so what we're going to hear today is a really wide perspective of different ways different companies deal with things. And so I thought it was very fitting to start with Nikki Clifton from UPS, which is a company in an industry that is not typically viewed as in an industry where there's a high risk of human trafficking. Yet UPS is one of the leaders in our corporate community on the area of dealing with the problem of human trafficking. And so we thought it very fitting to sort of bring you to the table and have that first conversation. So you're in a very unique industry in the area of human trafficking. Why is UPS focused on this issue?
Thank you for having me here today, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this opportunity. It's really an important topic, and it's one that did not come to us easily or really as anticipated. I'm sure a number of you are in the audience thinking, I don't know why a company would want to take the risk to put their brand out there, to associate themselves with anti-human trafficking issues. And that's frankly what we thought when the issue first presented itself. We got involved because of a phone call. And the phone call came from the Attorney General of Georgia. And uniquely, it was around the NCAA Final Four basketball tournament, big sporting event that Atlanta was hosting. And he wanted a number of companies to help fund billboards to help raise awareness in the city. And if you think about what's happening in Atlanta in a couple of weeks, there's another big game coming up. And just last week, I was with the now Attorney General of Georgia, Chris Carr, helping him host anti-human trafficking training for transportation leaders in our corporate office, because big sporting events act as a draw for human trafficking. Atlanta, where UPS is based, is one of the #1 cities for domestic minor sex trafficking, unfortunately. And the statistics are astonishing. At last count, sex trafficking raised about $290 million a year, which is more money than the city of Atlanta's illegal gun and drug trade combined. And when we started looking into what human trafficking, mostly sex trafficking, was doing for the city of Atlanta from a reputation standpoint, it just did not feel right. And so we helped to fund the billboards, but the more we talked to community leaders, we realized that employee awareness and employee engagement was really the first step, because when you first start talking about this issue, nobody really wants to dig into it. And it's something that it's difficult, it's seedy, you don't want to think that it's right there in your backyard, but the statistics bore out for us in Atlanta that it was in our backyard. There was no question about it. And government officials were coming to businesses asking for our help. And so that was the first indicator that we could be helpful. They wanted us to help from a monetary standpoint, but the more we thought about it, there was a lot more that we could do than write a check. And so we started looking at training for our drivers, because our drivers are everywhere. And I know I don't look like I was a UPS driver, but I had to drive for 3.5 months in Columbia, Maryland. And you would be surprised what we see and the opportunity that we have to be able to really act as community safety guardians. When I was driving on my route, I would see kids that were skipping school. I knew who was not where they were supposed to be, and sometimes I would say, go back home, I know what you're doing. And so from that context, we knew that our drivers were positioned to do the right thing if we gave them the training. And so we started doing that. And it's really been, I think, an opportunity that has grown exponentially. It's moved from just being the right thing to do to being something culturally that our employees have really, really gotten excited about, all the way up to our CEO. So
that's really exciting. So it's really focused on training and awareness and heightening awareness within the driver community for UPS.
That was the outset, and so because that's where we felt like we could have the biggest initiative from the transportation industry. The statistics are really shocking in terms of the modes of transportation that are being used to facilitate human trafficking. And so there's an article on your table where Delta's CEO Ed Bastian is talking about the fact that 70% of survivors have come through the airports or have been facilitated through the airline community. And so, and we know that in the trucking industry, girls and boys are being sold at truck stops. We know that because our drivers are telling us. And when we started looking at this training, our drivers were reporting to us that they had been confronted, they had been solicited. And in some instances, they didn't realize what to do. They didn't report it. They weren't facilitating or buying it, but they were like, you know what, we didn't really know what to do. And so our goal is not only to help train for them to make tips, but also to make sure that they understand that it's against our policy to use our corporate assets to further sex trafficking. And as a federal contractor, we're required to have a human trafficking policy. We're not required to train, though. And so I think our efforts to go beyond what's legally required has been because we realize that we really can make a difference. So our program started with the policy, making sure that we had a strong policy that was disseminated, and that folks understood that we don't want them using our corporate assets for buying sex. And that was important because it gets to the root of the issue, which is demand. And I think for all of you, if I can leave you with anything, it's looking at how to curb the demand side. Because if you don't have a buyer, then you don't have a victim. And the statistics show, unfortunately, that the buyers are everyday people. And they are everyday guys. This is a white-collar crime. It's not a lot of poor people who are out soliciting sex. This is a white-collar crime with folks who have access, they have time, they have resources. And if you think about things like the NCAA Final Four tournaments, if you think about the Super Bowl, who's coming to those events? It's people with money and time. And so from an entertainment standpoint, you have to get to those buyers when they're at work. And you have to help them understand that the policies prohibit engaging in that kind of activity, and then also that they can play a role, if they're not engaging, they can play a role in providing good tips and good resources. So that's what we're aiming to do.
That's great. So when we were talking about this panel and this program, You talked about some additional sort of ancillary benefits of having this very robust program and the training program that you all have developed over the years. Can you talk a little bit about that, share that with some of the companies in the room to
Sure.
talk about some of the unintended benefits
Yeah.
of the program?
And I will start by saying that trying to train 100,000 people is no easy undertaking. And so we partnered with Truckers Against Trafficking, which is a fantastic organization. They're based in Colorado because they understand our workforce. And so we were able to use them to help customize DVDs and webinars and wallet cards that we could easily hand out to our drivers. We also are engaging with a group called BEST, Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking, to help us customize information for our managers, because we need our management team to really understand why this is an imperative. So finding those community resources and finding those partners that can really help you just create a really good, strong policy right off the bat is important. And I think in terms of the ancillary benefits, we didn't realize how much this would engage our employees. We are a very diverse workforce. We are in 220 countries around the world. We are based in Atlanta, but our drivers are everywhere. We deliver to all zip codes. And I've been really surprised at the anecdotal feedback from our drivers, from our management team, about how they feel about UPS stepping up to this issue. We were just on the National Mall last week. We brought the Attorney General of DC and some other folks, members of Congress, onto the mall to tour a mobile museum that Truckers Against Trafficking has been touring around the country. And to see people's faces when they emerge from this mobile museum and understand what human trafficking looks like in their backyard, to see our driver who drove the tractor trailer around the country, and we provide in-kind moves of this transportation, this mobile museum, to see him talk about how proud he is to be affiliated with this initiative it's been absolutely amazing. This issue has also sparked engagement with elected officials in ways that we did not expect. I'm a member of our government affairs team. I am a lawyer, and I typically am on the proactive sort of side of trying to engage from a government affairs perspective, and you want to be able to talk to members of Congress about something good and tell them about something that you're doing for your community. And I've been really surprised at how interested members are in this issue. It is a bipartisan issue. Legislation was passed last year from a bipartisan perspective on taking down Backpage.com. And so it's been a really good way to engage not only with our employees, but also with members of Congress, with elected officials, all the way from the attorneys general to senators. And we've been really proud of that engagement.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for your remarks. I know we have a full agenda, and we could probably talk for another 45 minutes, but I think our time has run, and I'm really looking forward to the broader program. And thank you very much for everything you and UPS is doing in this area. And we'll see you around.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to ask our guest from the Department of Labor to come on up to the stage. I think you've got a slide deck that should be queued up. I'll let you guys go ahead and present that, and then I'll come back up.
Not sure for the slide deck. Oh, he's getting working. Okay, great. There it comes. Good morning, and as the other speakers were saying, thanks for coming out in the middle of all this rain, but at least it's not 10 degrees out, so we can all be happy about that. My name is Kevin Wilcuts, and I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of International Labor Affairs, and I help direct the Office of Child Labor, Forced Labor, and Human Trafficking. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I want to say first, just listening to Stefan and Nikki speak, it speaks to what one of our hopes is at the Department of Labor is that we can work with companies like yours who care about these issues. In order for us to make progress, we need to bring a sort of all hands on deck approach. And I think, as Nikki was talking about the training that they engaged with UPS, that's really heartening to hear. And one of the things that my colleague Rachel Reba and myself will be speaking about today is some of the work we're doing, but we're hoping that work, you can get to know a little bit about it. We left some material out there, we have 25 years that we've been in office working on these issues. But we hope you can understand more about what we're doing and that some of the tools that we have can be useful to you. So that's really our hope here today. iLab sees our work as ensuring that there's a global playing field that is fair around the world. And that's important for workers in other countries, but it's also important for workers here in the United States. Because workers in the United States shouldn't have to compete against governments that don't uphold fair labor practices. We promote fair global playing by enforcing trade commitments, strengthening labor standards, and the focus of the work of my office, which is addressing child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking. And again, very happy to be here with the focus today on trafficking. As was mentioned earlier, unscrupulous employers who exploit workers or governments that fail to act to end abusive labor practices, they unfairly undermine the competitiveness of law-abiding businesses and the services they produce for global markets. We can all agree that trade should not involve or be built upon the labor of children, shouldn't be based on child labor or slave labor. iLab's research, policy, and our trade and labor monitoring enforcement and our technical assistance is all committed to trying to help address the situation and address labor abuses. iLab negotiates, monitors, and enforces the labor provisions of trade agreements and trade preference programs. We do this in part to ensure that trade partners do not decrease workers' protections in order to gain, again, that unfair trade advantage or to attract investment because they're not upholding their laws. We bolster these efforts with targeted technical assistance and cooperation to strengthen compliance with the labor requirements of U.S. trade agreements and preference programs. We also actively work with U.S. Department of State and U.S. Trade Representative offices, as well as businesses and workers, to improve labor conditions in key trading partner countries. But today, we'd really like to focus, Rachel and myself, on the work we do that's addressing child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking. iLab helps raise awareness about these issues, in part through our 3 flagship reports. In September of 2018, we released the 17th edition of our findings on the worst forms of child labor, and the 8th edition of our list of goods produced by child labor and forced labor, as well as updates to 2 apps that we have. One is known as Sweat and Toil, and the other is Comply Chain. These reports highlight sectors where abuses persist around the world, and they describe the progress that countries are making to uphold their commitments to address child labor issues. We use this research not just so that it will sit on the shelf, but that so we can go out and we can meet with and talk with government counterparts and talk about what they need to do to address these issues. And Rachel will speak more to what's in our reports, how we lay out the issues, but also how we look to make these actionable. And we hope that as you get to know our reports, that you'll see how they can also be of use to you in the work you do. So with that, let me turn over to Rachel so she can tell you a little bit more. Thank you.
So Kevin mentioned that in September we released 2 updates to our reports. And the first report is the findings on the worst forms of child labor. And it's not just various types of child labor, this also includes child trafficking, which is what is germane to our discussion today. And so this year's report covered 132 countries and territories that are the beneficiaries of U.S. trade preference programs. So it's not comprehensive to the whole world, but to countries who are under the generalized system of preferences. And within the report, each country receives a grade or a ranking based not on the size of its problem, but based on its efforts to address the problem in 5 key areas of laws, of law enforcement, of policies, of social programs, and of coordination among government and other actors. And so a country can receive a significant advancement, which is the highest and the best ranking, down to a no advancement, which is the lowest of the rankings. This just shows you countries around the world and some of the rankings they received. But we don't just want to point out problems in countries or gaps in countries. We also want to provide strategies to help governments who are interested in addressing this problem move forward. And so after we're done assessing countries' efforts and describing them in great detail, as well as describing the problem in the country, we then lay out for each country a set of suggested actions specific to that country and the gaps that we were able to diagnose. And in the 2018 report, there were over 1,700 country-specific suggested actions that we recommended for countries who wanted to move forward on these issues. And you will see from this slide that 63% of them, so a really high percentage, related to the need of countries to either strengthen their laws that they have on the books currently, or to better enforce their laws. So a significant amount of the gaps around the world are really related to lack of law enforcement. And what we have observed, and those of you who have multinational enterprises have probably observed as well, is that around the world, workplace inspection systems remain relatively weak across the board because of capacity issues, low resources, inadequate budgets, lack of fuel, lack of transport, lack of training for staff. For example, only 24% of the countries that were listed in the report this year, so out of 132, have adequately staffed labor inspectorates. And so if only a quarter of the world has enough labor inspectors, according to the ILO, to conduct inspections of workplaces, you can see that a lot of inspections are not being done. Law enforcement around the world is also really hindered by corruption, inefficient legal mandates, poor data collection, and lack of coordination. Our most recent report revealed for the first time that more than half of all labor inspectorates do not even have the authority to assess any sort of violation against problems that they find when they do workplace inspections. So they are merely observers who note that things are happening but are unable to do anything about them. So what does this mean for the business community? What it really means around the world is that if 76% of countries don't have adequate resources to monitor workplaces, and more than half of inspectorates are not authorized to assess penalties when they do find them, it's really then incumbent on the business community with, in many places, not that much support from governments to see what is happening in supply chains and to really remediate issues when they are found. And so we are using the 1,700 suggested actions that I noted to really work with governments around the world to help them strengthen not just their labor law enforcement systems, but also their criminal law enforcement systems. The other report that we released this year is the list of goods made by child labor or forced labor, which can include adult forced labor, and this also would cover various types of human trafficking that we see around the world. And this is one of the key tools that we use for engaging with governments on a regular basis. And this year's report, we added 10 new goods, and you can see them here, that have never before been included in this list. We also added one new country, which is Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, if you're not familiar with their name change. And we added goods from the countries that are listed up there who have previously been on the list. We also this year, and I'll mention that now there are 148 goods on the list from 76 countries. Also, for the first time on this list, we added a good that's been produced exclusively by North Korean forced laborers. We know that North Korean forced laborers are sent by their government around the world, and their government collects remittances. But this year, we have timber from Russia that has been put on the list for the first time. So this is just showing you the most prevalent sectors, the most where we're kind of seeing new goods added, etc. But we don't just want to add goods to the list. Yes, often what the press covers is the things that we're adding, but this year we also removed 4 goods from the list because problems in those sectors were seen to be occurring in no more than an isolated incident. And this year, this was physic nuts from Burma, sugarcane from Panama, cotton from Paraguay, and cotton from Uzbekistan. But as you know, ultimately, lists can only be as good as the information that we have. And this is to say, when you're looking at the list, and if you're conducting business in these countries, many businesses look at the list to see where risk may be occurring within their supply chain, just because of the nature of what's going on in the country. But it is likely that there are goods that should be on this list that are not on this list as yet due to lack of information. And so often what we see is the countries that are on this list, and you'll see that some of them, such as Paraguay, Brazil, and Vietnam, have many goods on the list. And this is not because the problem is worse in those countries necessarily. This is really because these governments have taken the really important step to not only research the problem in their country and conduct national labor surveys, but also to release publicly the results of the research. And these governments are then to be commended. Rather than thinking the problem is so terrible there and worse than somewhere else, we want to really commend these governments for being transparent in the work that they are doing. And so in your interactions with them, if you are meeting with governments who have a lot of goods on this list, please thank them for the work that they are doing to find the issues, to highlight the issues, and then to address the issues. Kevin mentioned that we have 2 mobile smartphone applications. Both of them are available on the Google and Apple app stores for free download. And the first one is our Sweat and Toil app. And so what this app does is takes the 2 reports that I just mentioned, so almost 2,000 pages of research were you to look at our reports online, which you absolutely can, and puts them condensed into one app. So once you download the app, you can then use it anywhere in the world without any kind of internet connection, which is really useful if you're working in developing countries without stable internet. But you can really quickly go into this app. You can look for a country you're interested in, you can look for a specific good you're interested in, and you can see where risks might be in supply chains. Our other app is called Comply Chain, and you will find a flyer about this app in the middle of your tables. And DOL developed this app to assist businesses around the world in identifying and remediating abuses in their supply chains. And so some businesses are really far along in their work on supply chains, some are just starting out. And this tool is really good for businesses and their suppliers, especially, their 2nd and 3rd tier suppliers that are just starting out. We released this app for the first time in 2007, and then because of feedback that we received from the business community about how useful the app was and how it would be useful to their lower level suppliers in foreign countries, we released an update to this app in September in French and Spanish. And we are working on, for this coming year, potentially at least 1 additional language. So we will continue to develop this, but this app is really a place that you can go to get some basic training, very basic resources, and little vignettes about companies that have done amazing work in this area. to really help suppliers get started in looking into abuses in their supply chains.
Thanks, Rachel. So as Rachel was saying, these tools that we have developed in this research, we hope it's important to you in terms of informing the work you do. We also use it to inform the work that we do in countries. We have worked in 97 countries in terms of technical assistance. We have funded 332 projects. We've worked with 85 organizations. Many of these are the organizations you would think about when you think about groups that have worked with children, but who also have worked on issues like forced labor and trafficking. We currently oversee an active portfolio of projects that's worth about $275 million. These projects are working on the ground with NGOs. They're working with governments, trying to help them address some of the gaps that Rachel was speaking about, particularly in the area of laws, when laws are not up to international standards, providing training, also working to improve enforcement. In the area of child labor, trying to help children access schooling, working with families so they are not dependent on the labor of their children and they're not as vulnerable to trafficking. We funded this past year 6 new projects, and I want to mention a couple of them. One of them was a $7.5 million project with Windrock International. This one was specifically focused on strengthening laws, improving law enforcement, and improving coordination amongst different law enforcement agencies. We know here in the United States that's what makes us more effective on addressing things like trafficking. We want to share that experience around the world. This project will also focus on Thailand and Paraguay, and we'll be adding countries as the project moves on where we see a need. We also awarded a project to Partners of the America to improve conditions of work and to reduce child labor and forced labor in palm oil supply chains. This project will be focused on Colombia and Ecuador. With all of these projects, we hope that we can pilot efforts that are effective, that address gaps, but our real goal is we want people in the country to take ownership for these efforts, to replicate good practices, and to scale them up. And we look for all of this to tie into the engagement we do with our programming, with our research. So in all of these ways, and with the tools, the applications which we produce, we want to make sure that you're aware of these. Please continue to give us feedback. Let us know how we can be of help. As I said before, we're really happy to be here, and we want to partner with you. We want to find ways that we can be more effective and leverage your expertise and that we can lend ours. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, good. That's on. I want to thank both Kevin and Rachel for their remarks and for being here today. Just a couple of questions to expand upon that a little bit to talk about some of the work iLab is doing. As you've heard today, a big theme of this event is partnerships between government, NGOs, and in particular employers. So I wanted to ask you to expand just a little bit on how you work with the private sector, how companies here that may not be engaged with you already, how can they get more involved with iLab's work?
Oh, that's great. No, thank you very much. And I want to mention that we've had a long history of working with the private sector, and it really covers a number of important sectors that are important to the U.S. economy. We've worked for about 18 years on issues related to child labor and cocoa production, and we have worked with some of the biggest companies in the U.S. and in the world on these issues. These are the companies that produce chocolate, but also the ones that are involved in processing cocoa. In Madagascar, we're working in the area of vanilla production, and that's been really important, and the participation of governments with business has really been instrumental there. In Rwanda, we're working on tea, and Rwanda they were hoping to be the first country that could say that they had a tea sector completely free of child labor. And this is the kind of thing we want to tell a government that wants to step up and make that commitment, we want to provide them the support so they know what it will take and they have the practices that they need to work on and scale up. I also want to mention a project that we're funding this year, which is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Looking at an issue I think that we're all looking at right now is with our smartphones, and as we look at more cars that are running on electricity, we know that we need cobalt as a key input. That's something that we have seen more companies looking to how can they find ways to ensure that the cobalt that we all need for these items that we use every day and that are so integral to our lives, but how can we make sure that that doesn't involve child labor? So we're working right now with companies, and we're hoping to work with companies, with the civil society, with government to address that situation.
Rachel, anything you want to add to that? Or okay. You kind of hit on something important there, which with the cobalt issue, which is the supply chain, right? So a lot of the firms in this room and business generally are very concerned about how they can ensure that their supply chain does not involve trafficking or child labor. So are there things that you do specifically to help companies understand how to map out their supply chain, how to look at their supply chain for any trafficking issues?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So one of the things that we really are focusing on is, as I mentioned earlier, our comply chain, smartphone application. And it's also, you don't just have to look at it in your tiny smartphone or your tablet. You can also find the entire app online as well in larger view. But the really cool thing about this app is that it has embedded within it links to many resources, not just Department of Labor resources, but resources from a variety of companies, from a variety of cross-sector initiatives, from trade organizations, et cetera, that we have been engaging with, working with, partnering with. So we've tried to put the best that is available right now in one place for organizations to use. We also, as Kevin mentioned, are engaging very actively with businesses that want more engagement with us. And so to that extent, there are members of our team who are regularly doing webinars, who are doing various sorts of training for the business community. I'll also mention, too, some of our other government colleagues were not able to be here today because of the shutdown. But this morning, the Department of Labor, or not Department of Labor, the Department of State sent me some points as well about one of their tools, which normally I don't read off of a phone during a presentation, but I will share with you. The Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, known as JTIP, they have a tool called the Responsible Sourcing Tool that they put together with an NGO called Eradicate. And this is an online tool. You can easily access it at www.responsiblesourcingtool.org. And what I want to mention to you about the tool, which is very in-depth and covers many sectors, 43 different commodities, but the good things that it also has in it that may be helpful are they have a variety of comprehensive risk management tools that organizations can go and engage with and look into. But what they specifically have is a tool with criteria for screening and evaluating labor recruiters, which is helpful for organizations that are using foreign workers, either here in the US, if you're bringing workers into the US, or if you're working overseas and bringing foreign workers from other countries there. A tool for monitoring the performance of labor recruiters, a sample supplier and subcontractor self-assessment, a tool on conducting migrant worker interviews, which is a really important thing to be looking at, and sample compliance plans. And they are regularly updating this website and this tool, and they are going to be adding a whole new component on the food and beverage industry, I guess soon. They don't say exactly when that is expected to be released, but soon. And so that's something you can continue to check back in if you're not already engaging with JTIP or Verite individually to look at some of their resources.
Great. The International Labor Affairs Bureau, by definition, tends to work in international issues, as you might guess. But are there things that you're also doing domestically to help employers understand the trafficking issue?
Yes, our various DOL agencies. So as you know, ILAB is a small international bureau embedded in a very large domestic agency. And so our large domestic agency has bureaus and divisions and other agencies that are working on a variety of different things. And so the prime agencies that are working to combat human trafficking here in the U.S. are the Wage and Hour Division, where our Labor Inspectorate sits, the Employment and Training Administration, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the Office of the Inspector General. And these entities are each doing different things, but for instance, the Wage and Hour Division is continuing to inspect workplaces throughout the U.S. and noting violations, and when they note suspected human trafficking violations, their role is to turn those cases over to Department of Justice, FBI, local level criminal law enforcement, depending on the situation and the jurisdiction. Wage and Hour is also responsible when human trafficking cases are moving through the court systems for conducting the back pay that human trafficking victims are owed. So they do all of the calculations for that, which are then introduced into this court of law. They also calculate restitution, which is owed for victims. So it's a really important part of the legal process in this country that DOL, from a labor perspective, is feeding into. Our inspectors and our colleagues from the Employment and Training Administration are also involved in local city-level task forces throughout the country, the human trafficking task forces, as well as the Department of Justice's ACT teams, which are pilot programs throughout the country to address human trafficking. ETA is also right now really looking into human trafficking in agriculture in the U.S., which is a significant problem that we do have in our country. And so they are doing webinars for the state workforce agencies so that the states can better be inspecting and addressing these issues. So these are some of the things that we are doing. Office of Inspector General continues to pursue cases related to human trafficking, which we don't have much information to share publicly about, but they are actively moving forward with litigation issues.
Okay. Last question for you all before I let you go. You talked a lot about the apps that you developed, and those are pretty interesting. I didn't even know those were there, so I appreciate
So you can download
bringing that
them.
to our attention. Yeah. So as you move forward with kind of the next generation of those, are there ways that companies here, the Chamber, can engage with you to help refine those tools and make them perhaps more effective?
Absolutely. We are eager for your input. We crave as much input as we can get, in fact. So if you have input about foreign languages that would be useful for you to have Comply Chain translated into, we have not decided on the language for this year as yet, so we would be interested in that input. If you know of resources that would be helpful to the business community that we have not included in Comply Chain, we would love for you to point us in that direction. If you see things in any of our apps that are confusing, that are incorrect, that could be better elaborated upon, you know, if in the steps in Comply Chain we've missed something that you think is glaringly obvious, please come tell us, email us, call us, come meet with us. We will come meet with you, because we really are wanting our apps to be as useful as possible to the work that companies are grappling with, because these are really difficult issues, and we want to help especially the companies that are just at the cusp of starting to think about and work on these issues, really take hold of them and learn from the lessons that a lot of you have had to go through for the past couple of decades in trying to figure this out from scratch.
And if I could just add, when we came out with these apps, this was a big thing for us to do going into, for government to be going into that space, and we found with our Sweat and Toil app that it's been a wonderful tool that we can provide to businesses, to governments. It's very easy to work with. A lot of companies are using it as part of their risk assessment. which we're really happy to hear about. And like Rachel was saying, we welcome feedback. But we're also looking, technology keeps changing. So also, if you know of something, if you're looking at, particularly our supply chain, we're looking at that right now and saying, is this the best way to present the information? So if you also have an idea of Department of Labor, could you change the way you're showing that, or add this or add that? Let us know. We really benefit from your ideas, and a lot of you are on the cutting edge of the use of some of these technologies, and we could use the help, so we appreciate it.
So is there a formal process to weigh in? Is there a Federal Register process, or people just reach out to you directly? What's the best way for people to get engaged on that?
You can reach out to us directly. You could email us. We have a Global Kids email that can go to anyone, but you can just reach out to our offices, and we welcome the feedback. There's no need for any formal process to let us know what you like and what you don't like. We'll just take whatever information and suggestions you have.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate
Thank you very
you
much.
being here today. So next up, we're going to talk about a red team exercise that the Chamber did earlier or I guess in the latter part of last year. We engaged with a company called Red 6 Solutions, which came in and conducted what's called a red team exercise with a couple of the companies that are here, some Chamber staff, with the idea being we're going to determine how companies wanted the Chamber to engage in this space. So the two members of the Red 6 team, Scott Serino and Andy Dreby, were hopefully going to be here today. They are unfortunately, I believe they're out of the country, so they couldn't be with us. However, they were kind enough to put together a video, which we're going to queue up. It's about 5 minutes, so bear with us while we get that queued up, and hopefully you'll enjoy the video.
Thank you so much. I'm Gabriella Herzog with the U.S. Council for International Business, and I'm honored to participate in this next session, which is going to be a moderated panel with 3 leaders in U.S. business industry really working on this challenging and really shared effort collectively that we have on working to eradicate modern slavery and forced labor. This is a difficult topic. I mean, we've heard some of the statistics, and it can be an uncomfortable topic, but it's an important one that we all engage on meaningfully and together. The International Labor Organization, where USCIB serves as the U.S. business representative, has estimated that worldwide modern slavery involves over 40 million victims, in particular women and girls. Forced labor is an element of it, and these practices around the world really do intersect with company operations. If you're a global company operating globally, you'll encounter this, unfortunately, in societies around the world, but we have to admit it's also taking place here in the United States. So I'm really looking forward as we get into this section of today's agenda focusing on doers and action to hear some of the leadership examples that we have here. So I'm honored to introduce, I'll go through their titles, and then one by one we'll take the opportunity to hear some of their corporate examples. We have with us Mimi Braniff, who is the Managing Director of Government Affairs at Delta Airlines. Ryan Burns, a manager of Federal Government Affairs with Walmart Corporation. And also Anessa, or Ness, is that okay if we call you
Yes.
Ness? Perfect. Ness Parker. She's a senior manager with Deloitte Consulting. So what's really fascinating about this panel is if you think about the size and scale of these companies, Delta, I think we'll hear, but I think over 300 destinations, 52 countries, 15,000 flights taking place daily. But then Deloitte, one of the world's largest professional services company with, tell me if I'm wrong, 286,000 professionals within the network. Amazing in terms of impact not only with their client base, but think about the power, and I guess we'll learn how you're harnessing the power of that employee network. And then of course Walmart, what can we say, one of the world's largest retailers, and a number of very impactful projects that they're involved in this shared fight. So I think what would be helpful for those in the room is to hear from each of you in turn, how did you get started? Why are your companies involved on this issue? How did you get started, and how are you focusing? Could we start with Mimi?
Great, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion and learning from my fellow panelists about their best practices to see if it's something we can incorporate into our business as well. But this has been a core issue for Delta Airlines really since 2011. And it's generated interest from our C-suite and really has just trickled down through our company. We were one of the first airlines to adopt the Blue Lightning program. We actually worked with DHS to develop their training when they rolled that out in 2013. And then as a company, we kind of took it to another level in 2016 when we created our own anti-trafficking steering committee. And it's a cross-divisional steering committee. I'm happy to sit on that committee to represent government affairs. But we also have our media folks, our tech op folks, our pilots. And so really what this group does, this group of about 10 folks, is it provides us different insights on how not only we can reach employees, how we can reach our customers. So it is a federal mandate to train your frontline employees. We're happy to report that we have 54,000 employees at Delta who've been trained in anti-trafficking measures, but we have 80,000 employees, and our goal is the 80,000. So one of the things we did is we partnered with Polaris to create a new trafficking awareness training program. which we rolled out this year. So really, our goal is to focus in 3 areas. And those 3 buckets are 1, our employees, 2, partnerships, and then 3, our customers. But focusing on our employees, I mentioned the steering committee. Out of that steering committee, we've created ambassadors. And so these human trafficking ambassadors are really our educators, and we send them out to our airports that help not only notify folks about the training that they can take through either Blue Lightning. There's also other options of just knowing what the Polaris number is and reporting information that they feel is just not right, kind of in the see something, say something vein. On the partnership level, I mentioned we've partnered with Polaris, who runs the national hotline. So not only do we partner with them in a monetary level, I did mention the training, but we also partner with government entities as well. And then lastly, on kind of the customer avenue, one of the programs that we launched in 2016 that we're very proud of is the Sky Wish program. And that allows our customers to donate their Sky Miles to Polaris, which then Delta will match on a mile-by-mile basis. And that allows them to purchase tickets via miles to get these victims out of harm's way. And then really for this month, what we're very proud of, and I know our CEO's letter, I believe, is on the table, is we took our awareness campaign to another level this year that we're really proud of. The letter our CEO wrote, which is on the table, is included in our Sky magazine this month, which is in every single plane that we have flying. And then we also created an awareness video on trafficking. And this is, as you mentioned, a gritty topic, and this is now being put to the forefront of our customers. And I did bring the video. We haven't practiced this, so I don't know if they could run it, but if they could, that would be great.
I just saw a thumbs up.
Awesome. Huh?
My uncle will get mad if he hears me talking to you. He's not really my uncle. That's just what he told me to say. He says I'm worth a lot, but he still won't buy me any clothes that fit. Or any clothes, really. All I have is what I'm wearing. He says I'll have everything I need when we get to where we're going. I just hope that wherever we're going is better than where I was. We had to work all the time. We never got to eat or sleep. It was worse for the girls. I'm scared. I don't know what's gonna happen or how to get out. I can't say anything. I need you to do it for me.
If you see signs of human trafficking, text HELP to be free. It's not just a message, it's an opportunity to save a life. At Delta, we've trained over 56,000 of our employees to recognize the signs of human trafficking. But we need your help.
Mimi, wow. Tell us a bit more about the audience for that, and how do you measure how it's working in terms of sharing that?
So we worked with Polaris to develop this video. It's clearly a very gritty topic that's hard to push forward on your customers. One of the thought processes that we went through is we know it's hard. We do have kids on the plane as well. So what we did decide to do, it's on all the in-flight systems. what our lead flight attendants are doing is they're announcing that the video is available, announcing it is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. The video is available, and it's something that folks can select on their in-flight monitor. So we wanted to be mindful of kids on the plane, but at the same time, we also wanted to engage our customers on this issue and give them the opportunity to learn more.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Ness, I wonder if we could turn to you. We talked about your large employee base as well, but also your customer base. How is Deloitte engaging on this, and how did you get started?
Sure. So thank you so much for hosting this, and it's incredible to see so many of you here and so many familiar faces that I think have been on this journey for a long time. So thank you for what you guys do, because there's a lot of experts here just in this room, not on this stage. So Deloitte, we are a very large professional services organization. There are it changes depending on acquisitions, but I think we can say we're over 280,000 globally. So we're quite large. And I mention that though because of our scale and our breadth. If you just think of what our ethos is, at the end of the day, our purpose is to best serve our clients. Dual, though, is also giving our people the best talent experience possible. And so when you couple those things together around issues like human trafficking, it's really just been this incredible moment for us to be able to marry both the interest and passions of our staff with the needs of our clients. So for us in the US, it's almost 60% of our workforce in the US are millennials. And if you look at those demographics and what the interests of many millennials are, it's marrying up social impact issues like human trafficking and a plethora of others. So if you just distinguish sort of the story that Mimi mentioned with Delta and our story at Deloitte, this has actually been far more grassroots driven, where it's been a lot of our junior staff at the local level that are trying to make change in their communities. And how do they do that effectively, both by serving their clients, whether they're corporations or governments, or actually through pro bono. So our story actually started probably around 2011, at least here in Washington, D.C., serving the Department of Homeland Security. In that moment in time, immigration reform was a hot topic. It seems to always be a hot topic. But in that moment, it was something we were advising our clients on that issue. And we were honestly just doing something very sort of typical of management consultants, data analytics. And we were doing data analytics and realizing that we could help serve some of our Immigration Customs Enforcement ICE clients with some of the cases that they were working. So this, again, started off with us in Palantir just doing pretty typical link analysis for them, but it turned into a much bigger story for us because we realized we could be nerdy consultants and do data analytics and marry that up with a cause that meant so much. And being able to work those cases in that context was really just sort of a paradigm shift for us. And we started to do more and more with our federal government clients, so having supported the State Department, Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security, the Blue Campaign, and others, but then also working with state and local governments, as well as you can imagine, a lot of our commercial clients. And we've been able to marry up our typical consulting toolkit, so whether that's supply chain and due diligence, whether that's training and talent issues. And so it's been this marriage of linking up core capabilities for us with an issue our people and our clients are asking for. For me personally, though, because I think that was a little bit of the question, I got connected to this issue. I think, like so many, you learn about it and you just can't walk away. And so for me personally, I was traveling in Southeast Asia and was at a hotel and honestly just thought I was interacting with a maid. And I recognized pretty quickly that just something didn't feel right. And at that point in my life, realizing that someone who looked like me was about my age and just had been handed a circumstance that was just deplorable was just for me a moment that I couldn't walk away from this issue. So being able to do this at Deloitte has been incredibly meaningful, and happy to share more on specific stories, cases. I can talk about our government clients, as I have mentioned. I won't talk about our commercial clients by name.
Perfectness. Thank you so much. Ryan, how about at Walmart? Global retailer, everyone knows, tremendous size and impact and possibility and action. What's happening at Walmart and how did it get started there?
Yeah. I hope everybody's heard of Walmart before. If you haven't, let's talk afterwards and we can introduce you to I think it's the greatest retailer in the world. So thanks again, Gabriella, for hosting this panel. Thanks for the Chamber hosting this event this morning. First off, can we just admit, really heavy topic, forced labor and human trafficking. I remember, and I thank you for diving into the personal side, because I was thinking, how did I get involved in this? And I was in high school years and years ago at a tiny school in the South. So I was sitting in our gymnasium for kind of, we had a representative from Love 146 come to our school. Has anybody heard of Love 146 before, the organization? Is anybody from Love 146? Because that would have been kind of neat. I would say thank you for changing my life. But the representative came in and talked about human slavery, trafficking, forced labor for the first time. And as a high schooler, I just remember first being shocked. What are you talking about? This is something I read about in a textbook, not something that I've touched in my own life. And it changed me. So not only was I shocked, though, I was also inspired, because there were folks like Love 146 and A21 and International Justice Mission and Human Trafficking Institute and on and on and on that are actually doing work in this space and making a huge difference. So that sort of set a fire in me to be a part of it. And now I'm excited to work for a corporation that is involved, and I would even say is not afraid to be involved in this topic, which is something special about Walmart. So some of you might know Walmart well. Others of you might be thinking right now, why in the world is Walmart talking about forced labor and human trafficking? What are they doing in that space? It doesn't make any sense. They just run big stores across the country and across the world. So first and foremost, we are a global company. We're in 27 countries worldwide. We employ about 2.4 million people across the world and have interactions with about 100,000 suppliers across the world. So when we talk about scale, along with Deloitte and so many others, we're talking massive scale of supply chains in particular. So how do you look at those supply chains? How do you interact in those from a responsible sourcing perspective? So in 1962, our company started. We grew into this behemoth we call Walmart now and are all over the place. And a moment, I would say, happened in 2005. Our CEO, Doug McMillan, likes to talk about this moment when Hurricane Katrina came through. We were running great stores. We were spreading across the world. We were doing good business. And for probably the first time, our company stepped back. And when Hurricane Katrina tore through New Orleans, we realized we had the opportunity to do good in the world above and beyond our core business. And there's an iconic image that Doug has hanging in his office, which is a line of trucks. If you haven't seen it, Google it at some point. But it's a line of trucks waiting to go into New Orleans. And we had the chance to be a part of those relief efforts and to change a few lives along the way. So we came back and said, that was amazing. How can we keep doing things like that? And so we took on this initiative we call Global Responsibility, which has 3 tiers: sustainability, opportunity, and community. And a big part of that opportunity and community initiative for us is in the forced labor and human trafficking space. At our core, we're a company who's focused on people. And what gets me excited is following 2005, starting that Global Responsibility initiative in those 3 places, we came to believe 2 things pretty fiercely as a company, and it changed us. The first is that every single human being on the face of the planet has inherent value and dignity. Doesn't matter where you were born, doesn't matter where you work, doesn't matter what color your skin is, you have inherent value and dignity. And I see a couple of heads nodding, so we're not in church, but if you want to say amen, I'd be okay with that. And the second part of that is that as a company, we realized we have a responsibility and opportunity to promote and defend that dignity and value in a whole bunch of cool ways. So if you leave with nothing else this morning from what Walmart does, remember that Walmart believes in the dignity of people. Walmart believes in the inherent value of people. And so often, as this room knows, probably more than anybody else in DC this morning, that value and dignity is taken advantage of on a daily basis, all over the place, in horrific ways. So a couple of just concrete things that we're doing on this front, and forgive me for my notes, I get carried away sometimes, so I just kind of try to stay put on where I'm going before I get too excited. First is responsible recruitment, our initiative on responsible recruitment. We're involved in a couple of really neat groups of organizations and government officials, the first of which is the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruiting. We're a core member of this group, which brings together a number of stakeholders to deliver pilots with various partners like International Organization for Migration and the Responsible Business Alliance. And these pilots are aimed at transforming the way that foreign workers are recruited into our supply chains. So, big group of folks looking at the problem all across supply chains, saying, what can we do? And so we focus on training. We focus on initiatives to teach. How do you responsibly recruit? If you have folks who aren't doing that, how do you get out of that system and change your practices as a business? Second is we're involved in a group called the Consumer Goods Forum, which brings together over 400 retailers and manufacturers and service providers in that industry to create positive change. It's aligned around 3 key principles that we helped form as a part of that forum. The first is we believe every worker should have the freedom to move around and that you shouldn't be stuck in a particular place or job if you don't want to. The second is that no worker should have to pay for a job. Pay to get the job, not be paid for the job. No worker should have to pay to get the job. And third, that no worker should be indebted or coerced to work at any point in their career or in any place at any time. And so around those principles, we continue to foster global cooperation through the CGF on those areas in that consumer goods industry. Second, we're really involved in responsible sourcing, and we have a couple of major changes that we pushed out over the past couple of years with our suppliers. We first updated our standards for our suppliers. Like I said, 100,000 of them across the world. You can only imagine how big of a network that is to keep track of what's going on. We realize responsible sourcing is a major concern for a lot of Americans, but also a lot of folks around the world who shop in our stores. So we updated those standards, and we have clarified expectations for our suppliers for responsible recruitment, for eliminating forced labor and human trafficking in their businesses, and providing safe working conditions across the world. So I'll wrap it up there for now. I've talked a lot, but those are just a couple of the neat, concrete things we're doing at Walmart based out of this value. And we look at people. We look at statistics, and in those statistics we see stories. And in those stories we see faces. And in each of those faces we see value and dignity that we want to promote and defend in any way, shape, and form that we can as a company. And we're pretty serious about it, and we don't plan on going anywhere else soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. Mimi, Ness, and Ryan, today's focus has been largely on partnerships. In your own ways, you've talked about different entities like Polaris, or at the state and local government level, on an industry base with things like the Consumer Goods Forum. What lessons are you learning or taking away from how partnerships, when they work well, or what things are you hoping to see going forward as inside your companies you take this work forward, but especially with that partnership lens? It's so fantastic and it's so critical that we have large global companies such as yours operating. How do we spread the wealth? How do we get more companies on the team? And is that something that you all think about within your own industries as you look towards the future of what you're going to be doing on this fight?
I'm happy to jump in right there. We value our partnerships. We view this as a multiplier effect in terms of getting the issues of awareness out there, as well as training and having people just learn about the issue, which we think is important. One of the areas that our CEO has taken a leadership role in terms of getting other companies involved in, if you think of Atlanta, there's a couple of other Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered in Atlanta, and so this year he convened a meeting with the CEOs of Chick-fil-A, Aflac, Coke, and a couple others where they talked about this issue to get them more involved. So we have that engagement level at the CEO with other companies. But the other aspect of this that we're really proud of is our employees. When we did our first kickoff event where we thought maybe 400 employees would come, we had 700 employees show up. And at this event, we also invited local nonprofit groups into the area where there are volunteer opportunities for them. So by bringing these nonprofits into our flight museum at the time, it allowed our employees a direct engagement into them. So now we've started this in 13 other cities, which are our hubs. So we now have a coordinated volunteer opportunity for our employees and these nonprofits. So partnerships are important to us.
And just to echo the partnership piece, so we've been fortunate to work with several, I'm going to just say civil society groups over the years. One of them that has been a partner for a long time is Free the Slaves. And if you just Google the freedom ecosystem, we co-authored with Free the Slaves and then Harvard Kennedy School just a short article on sort of what are the key tenets that actually make partnership work, because arguably it is easier said than done. So we highlighted some bright spots that we saw sort of at that moment around that issue. And I mention it because when I look at sort of the last few years and some of the other things we're seeing, I think Sustainable Development Goal 8.7 and how civil society, government, and hopefully business are really coalescing on what our different roles and responsibilities are in this space. And I'm personally really excited to hopefully see that sort of ratified by the ILO soon. In terms of the future, the other thing I'd offer is we've been thinking a lot as an organization, what more can we do? But also, like, what is sort of the next evolution? I'll call it a movement. And we would make the case that we have seen so much great work around infusing and having leadership of survivor voice in this movement. And so we did a project with Polaris a few months ago actually talking about, like, what are the research standards that are needed to actually start codifying and amplifying the voice of survivors and also the lessons learned over the years. And one of them that I think really spoke to us is, I'm going to just say, how do you think about the future of work and populations like survivors of trafficking or like people that have been refugees or people that have been formerly incarcerated? And Nikki, I'm really mad I missed your talk because no doubt you talked about this because you guys are doing some important work on this issue. But just as a plug, we're going to be working with American University on this sort of future of work topic. So if you guys are local to DC, please be on the lookout for that event because that is something that I really see as sort of the next iteration of where this could probably go.
Ryan.
Yeah, when we talk about responsible recruitment, clean supply chains, responsible sourcing, we realize the key to leadership in these categories is through partnership. We, even as big as we are, can't do it alone, and we'd be foolish to try in that respect. So partnership is huge for us in every way, shape, and form to combat this problem. One of the kind of recent examples of that that's been special to us is back in 2017, Walmart had the chance to represent the U.S. at the Bali process. And we were able to go to the Bali process and to give an overview and address crimes of modern slavery through a number of avenues on law enforcement, on information sharing, on ethical recruitment. And this was a massive process for us to put these proposals together, these presentations together with numerous, again, government, NGO, corporate stakeholders, and to actually have ideas that can be put forward to say, let's make real change in these arenas. So real change is necessary, and real change in our minds only comes through partnerships, so near and dear to our hearts. And we continue to reach out to partners and say, if you have ideas, let us know, because we want those ideas, and we want to know how we can be more effective and impactful in these really important arenas.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to the organizers just to check. I'd love to be able to broaden the conversation. This is a great opportunity for those of you in the audience to be able to ask questions of these representatives of these global companies. Do we have time for a couple questions from the audience? Great. Thank you. Put your hand up. There's a roving microphone if you'd like to dig in to some of these questions about partnerships or kind of employee engagement, designing awareness-raising tools for employees or customers. Don't be shy.
Hi, my name is Rick Lane. I volunteer my time to work with 150 anti-human trafficking groups around the country, and also a former Chamber alum, so I'm so proud of the Chamber putting this event together. One of the movies I would highly recommend that you see on this topic is I Am Jane Doe. I Am Jane Doe was done by Mary Maggio, an award-winning documentarian who shows what Backpage was all about, and was the impetus of the FOSTA-SESTA legislation that was discussed earlier that passed the House and the Senate and was signed by the President. Unfortunately, there is language in the US-Mexico-Canadian trade agreement that can undermine that legislation, because what that legislation did was to allow local and state law enforcement to go after websites that are knowingly facilitating human trafficking. And as someone said to me, a survivor said to me when we were working on this, it shouldn't be as easy to order a child online as it is a pizza. And so I'm hoping to work with others in this room, because that provision in the trade agreement could undermine the FOSTA-SESTA legislation, not just here in the United States and around the world, because we need to work together. And I'm hoping to work with the businesses in this building and with the chamber on that type of legislation, and to work and try to get that provision taken out of the trade agreements. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? We can take a couple questions together.
Thank you for all your presentations. Again, Kevin Wilkins from the Department of Labor. I just had a question as I'm hearing what you're talking about and thinking about where you work around the world, and I would be interested in knowing how you're partnering with smaller companies on the ground. Since, as you mentioned, with the efforts that Walmart's making, what Delta's doing, how do you work with your local partners to educate them about the issue, and also to encourage them and give them tools that can help them to be a part of this effort?
Just scan the room if we have another. And then if not, I mean, we had one question about a specific piece of important legislation. I'd like to expand that more broadly to just working with governments and the role of governments in fighting this issue. We heard some powerful statistics earlier from DOL about the arguably dire challenges we have in terms of the ability of governments around the world to effectively enforce laws regarding modern slavery or forced labor domestically. So one of the questions I'd like to filter back through is just your experiences as companies working with government, federal, state, local, and what, from your perspective, works, and if there's more things you'd like to see. And then separately, another important question about the role of small and medium enterprises. The reality is that global companies such as yours represent, I think, a single digit of like worldwide business in terms of a percentage. The vast majority of companies and business around the world are small and micro enterprises, I mean, family-owned firms. So that's not easy. That's diverse. Have you experienced success in initiatives trying to engage at that local level? And if not, do you have thoughts about how those types of empowering efforts at that local level work best? Maybe should we mix it up? Should we start with Ness? I mean,
I'll start with Ness.
All
Okay,
right.
good.
Well, I heard a few questions in there. I might just linger on one for a moment. So the question around the role of government and how is business engaging government on some of this. I'll just speak for our experience. So we are a professional services firm, so we do consulting, we also do audit. And so I mention that because we have experience having worked with different policy advisors on the California Supply Chain Transparency Act, on the UK Modern Slavery Act, and more recently with the Australian Modern Slavery Act. And so we do try to piece together different parts of our business as well as different sets of clients. So to play that out with an example, a few years ago when the UK was looking at the California Supply Chain Transparency Act, we actually brought together a few of our clients, both folks from California. We also brought together here from the US our State Department clients, as well as in the UK, our UK Home Office clients, to actually do what we call the tech camp, which was using a State Department tool, which is how do you actually infuse technology and different actors to solve a problem. And so we had a 2-day workshop with a lot of our commercial clients, and again, some California, US, and UK. government officials, actually working through that. And we offered essentially a workshopped version of the bill back to the Home Office as an example of how do you actually bring the ecosystem together, because I think at the end of the day, we all think that this is a deplorable issue. And at the end of the day, I think most business would agree that if we can better understand the regulations and have an even playing field, at the end of the day, I truly believe that most civil society groups and government are not here to shame and blame corporations. And this is really about moving the needle for everybody. And I think examples like that are hopefully hopeful ones. But again, it's a sticky issue. And I think it is fair to say a lot of different organizations have felt burned over the years. And so I think, again, just trying to have that goodwill and those forums that tend to be a bit closed door, in my experience, have been useful.
Ryan, can we go to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of questions in that kind of phrase. So I'm just going to pull out two and kind of combine them together. How can small and medium-sized businesses sort of get involved? How can, in local partners especially, and also what about government advocacy? How do you do that well? What's effective? So putting those things together, I think on the small and medium-sized front, for us it's about keeping it simple to some level. We can't do everything, right? And it comes back to this word partnership, right? Who are those valuable partners that a small or medium-sized business could partner with in the arena that they care about? And along with that, I think something we've really learned that's important is getting leadership buy-in from the top. So whoever is over the organization, whoever's at the top of the organization, the big turning point for us, as I mentioned, was this Hurricane Katrina event that sort of woke us up to the opportunities that were available to us. And our CEO, our CFO, our executive team, our board, all bought in and said, we really need to be doing this. We need to run great stores, but we also need to be effective in these arenas too. So I think any business has the opportunity to be involved, and I encourage them to be involved. But getting leadership buy-in so that it's an important issue for the company, and then also partnering with partners, which kind of takes me to that second piece, which is the government advocacy. And again, leadership in this arena for Walmart looks like partnership. We know that there are a lot of folks sitting in this room who actually know this world and this issue better than we do. They've been on the ground for a long time with local partners. There are local partners in these different countries that we work in, and they know this issue really well. So how can we tap into that? How can we effectively support and encourage and drive change alongside those local partners? So one example is Walmart partners with the Walmart Foundation, separate entity, who does over $1.5 billion in philanthropic giving every year. We came together and we partnered to support International Justice Mission in Thailand. In Thailand, there's a huge problem, as many of you know, in the seafood supply chain there, and it's an issue that we care a lot about, having clean sourcing from seafood supply chains in the Thai shipping and seafood industry. So we have partnered with IJM to be on the ground through, again, the Walmart Foundation's giving, to run criminal analytics and to find out best practices for how they can shut down those types of industries that are illegal, that are, again, not responsible sourcing by any means, and are also not responsible recruitment. But it comes down to that partnership model for us, that there are people on the ground who can do the work well, and we can support those. We can be effective in governments, but it's a two-way street that we love to be alongside others with.
Thank you, Ryan. Mimi, how about with Delta?
I'm going to focus on the government affairs question in light of my role in government affairs at Delta. And this goes back to our employee base. And one of the things that I'm very proud about is you think back to where our hubs are, and that's where a majority of our employees are. And we've been able to mobilize them to support legislation that impacts victims, also again, raising awareness to human trafficking as an issue. So for example, in Georgia, we were able to get 500 of our employees to do a lobby day to support legislation there, which created a child victims fund. Last year, here on the federal level, we worked with Fair Girls, with Polaris, with other groups to help move VAWA legislation through. So on the federal level, we view our role as more of a support role, as well as on the state level. I think that's a spot where we're looking to grow, particularly in our other hubs where we have employees who are engaged on this issue and want states as well as the federal government to help folks.
Perfect. Let me look to the audience again just in case we have some additional questions. Great. Back in the room. I've got a microphone that's going to come to you in just a moment.
Hey, I'm Matt Leonard. I'm a reporter with Supply Chain Dive. My question's for Ryan. You said you made some changes to the requirements you have for your suppliers, and I was wondering what the outcome of that was after you made those changes. Did you have to change any suppliers as a result, or was there any other changes that happened after you set those standards?
Yeah, what was your name one more time?
Matt Leonard.
Matt, it's great to meet you. Thank you for the question. Really important question, right? Because how do you measure effectiveness of changes is really important. So in that front, I want to point to training and partnership once again with our suppliers. So we touch a lot of suppliers across the world, and we have high standards for how those folks interact with us. But a big piece of that comes through training as well. So just kind of, again, a concrete example of what we're doing with those suppliers is we launched our Responsible Sourcing Academy training portal. It's a lot to get out, but it's a portal where these suppliers can come to and get educated, again, on these issues to be effective. So how do we meet those standards? Well, we not only want to just hold them to those standards, we want to help them get there. And that's one of the kind of concrete ways we're doing that.
Perfect, thank you. I think at this point, I'd just like to thank all of you and thank this panel. These are just very powerful examples of what these individual companies, Delta, Walmart, and Deloitte, are doing. And I think it serves as an inspiration for all of us in terms of what harnessing the passion and commitment and energy of employees. First and foremost, looking at influence through partnerships and business relationships via supply chains, also seeking out partners, and then working to engage customers and communities as well. All critical elements and great examples. Thank you for your commitment of your companies and your time on this. Thank you to the Chamber for bringing this together, and we look forward to engaging with all of you going forward on these issues. Thank you again.
Good morning. My name is John Drake, and I'm the Chamber's Executive Director for Supply Chain Policy. I am pleased to introduce you all to our keynote speaker this morning, Ms. Jolene Hollis. Jolene is a survivor leader, consultant, trainer, and social justice advocate. This morning, you will hear her story of the 10 years she spent being trafficked in the commercial sex industry, her escape, and her insights on combating trafficking. Her story is a powerful reminder that human trafficking happens close to home and often in the open, but it's also a story of the small things that can help those caught in trafficking and their lives after. I want to thank Jolene for making the trip from California to be with us this morning and for sharing her story with us today. Jolene?
Thank you, John, and thank you for the Chamber for having me today. I want to take the time also to thank you guys for being here and being involved in this issue. As John mentioned, I was trafficked in the commercial sex industry from 2004 to 2013 in approximately 13 states and 48 cities. During this time, I accumulated about 12 arrests, primarily for prostitution. I do want to acknowledge that my arrests are very low due to the amount of time I was trafficked compared to my peers of color. My criminalization affected my recovery and added to the trauma and distrust in authorities that I had already experienced. So how did I get here today? I'll just start with a piece of my background. I grew up in Turlock, California, a small country town located an hour and a half outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. My parents met in college at Fresno State and married shortly after. My mother graduated. My mother escaped an abusive childhood herself, and that abuse continued until she was 21. After that, my mother entered an abusive relationship with my father. Never recognizing or processing her abuse. So my mother was also the primary breadwinner in our family, working as a registered nurse and also teaching the nursing program in our local community college. Due to the abuse of my father, my parents got divorced when I was about 9 years old. I was the only child to witness the abuse between my parents, and I was also the only child of 3 to be verbally, physically, and emotionally abused by my father. But the violence didn't stop after the divorce, it continued. The abuse I encountered also was never discussed for face value. No one ever believed me, and I didn't have the language to understand and process. This caused me to live a very broken and confused life, causing a series of traumatic events until I was 27 and decided to heal. My mother and I had a very dysfunctional relationship growing up. She spent her time trying to find out what was wrong with me, and I spent my time running away from the continued violence in my home. My older brother, however, was the golden child, 3-sport athlete, and went on to West Point on a wrestling scholarship. My younger sister is 6 years younger. She also went on to college immediately after high school. She was also very sheltered from the abuse in our home. So I struggled in school. I struggled with PTSD, making it hard for me to focus and be successful. I had a tough time building healthy relationships. I started engaging in smoking pot and sexual activity when I was in the 7th grade. Despite being an exceptional athlete, it wasn't enough for me to stay in school, so I dropped out and began my journey through the juvenile justice system, in and out of juvenile hall and juvenile programs. I did, however, graduate from high school, and after I graduated, I left my mother's house to stay with friends and wherever I could. Desperate to succeed, I rode the Amtrak to Southern California in hopes to stay with my family and attend college. My family, however, did not exactly agree to this, and I headed back to Turlock after a few days. On my way home, I met my first pimp at Union Station in Los Angeles. He eventually became the father of my daughter. I was coerced into thinking his drug dealing would support me and I would be safe. In less than 24 hours after meeting him, I had a gun to my head and was forced to work the track in Fresno, California. We eventually ended up in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I was arrested multiple times and encountered some of the worst violence in my life. After 2 years, I had finally had enough. My last arrest was there in Las Vegas was when I was 4 months pregnant. When I got released, I left with whatever I could carry in the middle of the night, and I took the Amtrak back home. He followed me not long after and continued the abuse, breaking my nose and leaving me in the hospital when I was 6 months pregnant. He ended up going to prison when my daughter was 8 months old, where he remains to this day for charges unrelated to any of his trafficking. So I started going to school. I started working at a dual diagnosis program for mentally ill and homeless individuals. I was never identified as a victim. I was never addressed what I had experienced, and so I still struggled. The only thing I ever was identified as a victim of domestic violence and a prostitute. So I went through an intensive perinatal program. Again, never really addressing what we now and what I now am able to identify as sex trafficking. I decided I was ready to date, so I went on an online dating site where I met my second trafficker and encountered him. He was what we could call a CEO pimp, and I was intrigued by his fancy things and quickly began to work for him. The first night I worked for him, I made $1,500. This was enough to pay my rent and bills for the month. As a single mother, going to school full-time and working 2 jobs to support my daughter, this was very intriguing. So I thought I would be able to finish college, provide for my daughter without struggle. I eventually quit my job, dropped out of school, and placed my daughter with my mother. I began to work an East Coast circuit, working as a high-end call girl. I was living the good life, I thought. I was in fancy cars, nice hotels, 5-star dinners. On a bad day, I would make around $1,000, and on a good day, I'd make upwards to $5,000. Things were not as they seemed, though. Every dollar I made, I handed over for safety and savings, I thought. When I tried to leave, I was told I could leave with what I came with, nothing. I wasn't abused physically or mentally, but the coercion was much more difficult to bear. It took me 2 years and 17 attempts before I left for good, with nothing. March 31st, 2013 was the day I decided to not go back to him. For the next year, I worked as what they call a renegade. That's somebody that works in the commercial sex industry without a pimp or trafficker. My last arrest was December 10th, 2013, and the long journey from there, it was a long journey from that time to where I stand in front of you today. I don't know how I could have done it without the help from my church and my community. I created. I endured great shame, rejection, hurt, judgment, and a lot of misguided anger. It took me 6 months before I had the courage to go in public without fear and look for work, a legal job. What would I tell an employer? What was my gap in employment? Who would hire an ex-prostitute with active warrants? Because that's what society said I was. Desperate to find other women like me, I created a support group in my church where we processed our trauma and connected with each other through our faith. This was one of the most powerful experiences in my healing journey. In 2015, I started working in social services, and even through the organizations that started to realize there was a need for specialized services, very few focused solely on serving human trafficking victims, particularly when it comes to housing and shelter. In September of 2018, CAST opened the first emergency shelter for human trafficking in Los Angeles County, where I'm currently employed. As well as working at CAST, I have finally returned to school, focusing on holistic health. I will be starting school in fall to complete a master's program in acupuncture therapy, which I will use to help heal trauma. My life goal is to be able to send my daughter to college, equipped and knowledgeable about the world and safe from trafficking. It is also to be able to open up a healing center where we can focus on addressing the traumas that women endure while being trafficked. So what is CAST? CAST stands for the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. It was founded in 1998. There was actually a large Thai labor trafficking case in Los Angeles County where a group of 72 Thai workers had been kept in slavery for about 7 years. So CAST formed to support and guide these victims of labor trafficking through their freedom. Today, CAST serves both labor and sex trafficking. We provide emergency response 24/7 and long-term supportive services, including our 24-hour hotline, social service case management, legal services, shelter, training and outreach, public policy, and my favorite part is our leadership program. CAST hosts what we call the National Survivor Network. The National Survivor Network is a survivor-led network that brings together a community of survivors to support and encourage each other to realize to learn the value and insight, not just as survivors, but as experts in the field of human trafficking. The NSN has members from various backgrounds, or ranging from 24 countries and 32 states. So the next question is, what can businesses do? What can faith-based organizations do to help eradicate human trafficking? In my church, we have a human trafficking ministry, which supports not only the local nonprofits, but NGOs as well, providing material, support, and at times transportation to survivors. We also host survivor support groups as well. Our church has also created a training video and module of how you can start a ministry in your community or your church. Consider employing survivors. The big thing is once we rescue girls, which we tried to deter from using the word rescue, but once a girl or individual exits the life of human trafficking, what is next? How do you move forward when you escape with the clothes on your back? Most of the time when individuals come to our shelter, they come with what they have on, and that's it. And so it is our job to walk them through the process of their first 90 days of recovery and help them build a new life. So employment is something that is very difficult for them to do. So I really encourage you as businesses in this area or in this community and involved in this issue to look at what does it take to employ a survivor? What does it take to support somebody after they leave the life, and how do they move forward? Connect with your local nonprofits and provide services, and donate supplies to shelters and organizations. I'd like to close with this as well, and I really appreciate Nikki from UPS. Speaking up on the demand side, last night as I scrolled through Facebook, I saw a quote from one of my colleagues and survivor leaders, Autumn Burse, and she stated, "There's not always a trafficker, but there's always a buyer." So we cannot combat sex trafficking unless we start to really bring into the conversation the demand. So I challenge you as businesses to also start training and talking about the demand piece as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Jolene, would you be comfortable taking a few questions from the audience? Is that all right? Thank you. Anybody?
First of all, thank you for sharing your story. I know how difficult that can be. One of the policy issues that we're looking at trying to implement, you mentioned employment. I've also heard that there's a huge, when someone is trafficked, they also have their identity stolen. Their social security numbers, the pimps and others use those to open up credit cards and don't pay them off. So when someone tries to get a job and they run a credit check on them, their credit is just a complete mess. And maybe part of the conversation you can have with the business community is how do we address that issue so you can get a job, you can get a credit, you can get good credit again. And it wasn't your fault, it was somebody taking advantage of your information.
Definitely. So part of the National Survivor Network is we have a policy team, which is a group of survivors that actually creates, we also have a legal team, so we have lawyers that work alongside of us as well, and we create and lobby for bills to be passed. So I'd love to connect with you and see if you have something drafted or how we could support as a survivor network moving forward with that. So it's definitely an important thing, and not just employment, but housing as well. I mean, when you leave a situation and you have nothing, where do you go? How do you stay? I mean, one of the questions when we first started talking about human trafficking was, why don't they just leave? But the question is, leave to where? Leave to who? And how do you move forward once you leave? So that's a very important issue when we talk about recovery. Well, thank you.
Hi, Wendy Banyasko from Caesars Entertainment. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for being here with us today. I was curious about the faith your faith organization and the spreading awareness of how to create ministries within people's own organizations. Is that an awareness building that is sort of designed to go to any sort of religious organization? What does it request that people sort of come to you within their own organization who are already members? I'm really interested.
So we actually just finished filming and creating a video module, and all of our resources are free. So we're continuing to create and develop, basically just sharing what we've done and our experiences. As we know, when we're working with survivors and in this movement, everything changes, right? Sometimes statistics are focused on one demographic, and sometimes we need to focus on another demographic. So we always say, if you're gonna do this work, be open to change. Excuse me. So those are available, and I would love to connect with you and give you the website. The church that I'm involved with is Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California, and somewhere through the website is a link where you could find those training models. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jolene.
Hello, my name is Michael Billett, and I'm the co-program manager along with John Drake, and I'd like to thank Glenn Spencer and Stefan and our wonderful panelists today. They're really leading the effort on behalf of the employer community. One thing that we did here at the Chamber when we started this task force, and I've been here for a while, and as the co-manager, we decided to get together and think about innovative ways the Chamber could have a footprint. And I think one way that the Chamber as a business can have a footprint is everybody here produces a widget. We hear from Walmart a little bit about the supply chain in terms of the shrimp in Thailand, but there's a whole network of organizations out there that we're looking into partnering with, and some of you are attending here today. And the bottom line is, when components are made to produce a product or when there's labor involved, the most practical way for the Chamber to be involved with is on the supply chain management side. And we sat down, and there are some unheralded heroes in this room. I know Lori Frankel was in the back. I think she left, but we went through and we really copy edited this for quite close to a year to get this as perfect as possible. The big thing after hearing Jolene is it's really the power of one. So one thing that we do here, that I do as part of my job, is outreach. And you know, outreach is done in unconventional ways. In 2019, I watched a movie which Molly Thorson's here, and she was talking about her family's involvement with human trafficking, and she mentioned A21 is starting a DC office, and then I connected with Kristen, and I thought, isn't this a great way for the Chamber to be teaming up with a really communications campaign to amplify our message? So as we develop this toolkit, you know, it's very simple. People are really busy these days, and they don't have that much time, but they have enough time to read something that's concise, that's brief, it's to the point, and it's easy to remember. Because the big thing at the end of the day is that it should be, when you come out of here, you should say, yeah, I know exactly what these people are talking about. And we developed an acronym. Now we're in Washington, D.C., and there's plenty of acronyms flying around for every federal government agency. But I think the one we came up with was pretty clever. It's called PACT, Prepare, Act, Communicate, and Trust. And so we just go through simple things, and I know the Department of Labor was here, you know, and they went through their apps, and those are terrific resources for the business community. But the U.S. Department of State has the Trafficking in Persons report. So you just have to do some simple things like understand your risk, implement training and awareness programs, have policies in place that prohibit this, you know, utilize emergency technologies, activate third-party hotlines, you know, for any confidential complaints. Very easy for companies to publish a corporate responsibility statement, and then to become involved with global campaigns. One agency that has been talked about, which is impacted by the partial federal government shutdown, is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. But the Blue Campaign, I think that's a very easy lift, and Delta had the video earlier with Polaris. And then the trust part, which has to do with verification and audit programs. And then on the back, it says resources, and it all points to what you can get from the federal government and some of our trusted allies here in this area. So it's very easy. We've heard from a lot of members that are federal contractors that have to comply with the FAR procedures, and this is really a check-the-box exercise. Where I think this is going to have the most impact is what I call downstream impact. So if you're a federal contractor and you have multiple suppliers, just give it to them. At the end of the day, it's all about spreading the word and understanding what your obligations are. And as more and more people get acclimated, it becomes part of a systemic procedure and process, and then it spreads. So, the bottom line is we still have a lot of work to do. Scott and Andy had the videotape. They were out of the country. But we're looking for other people in this room to partner with on similar type toolkits. And, we look forward to maybe doing another one of these revamps, and they're not so near, but a little bit in the distant future. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Morse from A21.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today at this amazing event with the Chamber of Commerce. And thank you so much to all of the panelists who presented and to Jolene for sharing your story. You guys are truly leaders in this fight, and it's such an honor to be in this room and just see so many people who care about this issue and who are committed to doing something to stop it. As Michael mentioned, my name is Kristen Morse, and I'm really honored to be here to talk about A21 and also just to be able to share about this topic that all of us can agree on and all of us can actually do something about. And we know that that's really rare in the times that we're living in. Human trafficking is not just a bipartisan issue, but it's also a huge global criminal industry that generates more than $150 billion every single year. It's real, it's hidden in plain sight, and it tears at the social and economic structures of every country. And we know that no community is immune, that it's happening right here in Washington, D.C., and that it's happening in the communities that we serve. A21 stands for Abolitionists of the 21st Century. We're a global nonprofit that has worked for over a decade now to achieve our mission of abolishing slavery everywhere forever. We currently work in 12 countries, and in the US, our focus is on prevention education, public awareness campaigns, and then we have community-based aftercare for survivors of labor, trafficking, and sexual exploitation. A21's strategy is made up of 3 R's: reach, rescue, and restore. Reach is all about preventing human trafficking from ever happening in the first place through awareness campaigns and education curriculum. And it's really great because all of these initiatives under the Reach strategy are done in partnership and collaboration. Last year, our awareness event, Walk for Freedom, took place in 475 cities in 50 countries, mobilizing tens of thousands of participants and reaching 70 million people through social media. And Washington, D.C. was home of one of the most influential walks in the world. Our Can You See Me campaign launched recently in transportation hubs across the country. And it was in collaboration with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Polaris, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the U.S. Department of Justice. Posters and videos are featured in Amtrak stations throughout the country, and we're also in major airports such as Chicago O'Hare, Washington Dulles, and Dallas Fort Worth. Our high school education curriculum, Bodies Are Not Commodities, is being implemented into school districts across the nation, and this year we're scheduled to reach 160,000 students in the US with human trafficking education, and 2 million students worldwide in the next 6 years. Our It's a Penalty campaign is currently taking place around the Super Bowl, and it's estimated to bring awareness to 32.9 million passengers on flights and train tens of thousands of employees in hotels and also rideshare companies over the next couple weeks. A21's rescue strategy assists victims in identification, and also we do a lot when it comes to court cases and also with representing survivors in court. And so, sorry, my notes just went out. There we go. So we work really closely with law enforcement to support police operations, identify victims through our hotlines, and also provide care through our child advocacy centers, assist in prosecution of traffickers, and representation. We had 19 court case victories last year, 38 traffickers sentenced, and received 10,666 calls to our hotline, and trained 4,141 frontline professionals to identify human trafficking. Through A21's Restore strategy, we work face-to-face with every single person who comes into our care to be able to help them with their individual needs and provide them with access to housing, medical treatment, counseling, education, employment, and repatriation so that we can help them get to a place of safety and independence. In 2018, we assisted 300 survivors of human trafficking who are men, women, and children. And this included Malia, a 4-year-old girl from Thailand who was forced to beg on the streets from dusk until dawn. Anton, a 30-year-old male from Ukraine who was forced into forced labor without pay after being deceived by a false job opportunity. Ella, an 18-year-old American who came out of the foster care system, was offered love, and instead was forced to sell her body. A US survivor said something recently to our Freedom Center staff that really sums up the why behind why A21 exists and why we're all here today. They said, "Before I came in contact with A21, I felt like my life was meaningless, that I had no future, no sense of hope, and absolutely nothing to live for. Now, my life has completely changed. I feel like I have a future to look forward to, and I know that I'm building a life that my children will be proud of." Isn't this what we all desire? To be able to build a life that our children will be proud of and that the generations who are coming will be proud of as well, to make the world a better place than it was when we found it for those who are coming after us. Our actions matter because with each action, there is impact on the life of another person. This is key to addressing a huge global injustice like human trafficking, to focus on helping one life at a time through one action at a time. The toolkit Michael just presented makes these steps really easy. It's accessible, clearly laid out, and contains actions that all of us can get behind and implement. Human trafficking is an issue that many of our customers care about. It's been mentioned that millennials and the upcoming generation really want to do something to stop it. It's something that business owners can bring awareness to, train employees on, and as a result, shift culture. As we all do our part together, I really believe that we will see human trafficking ended. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think you all have the toolkit at your table. I'd encourage you to take it with you and refer to it. I think it's a really helpful document for everyone to have here. I think today was a great event. We heard a lot of powerful stories, a lot of good stories about companies' engagement here. If you remember one word coming out of this, I think it's partnership, right? It's the fact that no one entity can take on this challenge all by themselves. There's a strong partnership between companies, between government, between NGOs, and other groups that will help end the scourge of human trafficking. The second thing I hope we all take away from this is the fact that corporations, businesses, employers do have an important role to play here. There's a unique perspective that we all have that we bring to this challenge, and I encourage you all to stay engaged with it. As you know, at the Chamber, we have our task force on human trafficking. We're going to be scheduling a meeting sometime in the late winter to early spring. I hope you will all participate in that. If you're not engaged with this group, please let myself or Michael Billett or John Drake at the back of the room there know, and we can get you plugged into that. So with that, I just want to say a quick word of thanks to our Chamber staff that helped put this all together, to the participants in the event, especially Jolene. Thank you for sharing your story. I think we're all very touched by that and very moved by it. And I also want to thank all of you for attending today. So please reach out to us at the Chamber here as to how you can connect with us on this issue, things that you'd like to see us doing in this space. So that will conclude today's event, and thank you all for coming.